On Thanksgiving, my daughter-in-law placed a plate of scraps in front of me and said, "This should be enough for you." Everyone pretended not to notice, but a minute later, I walked over to the holiday dessert table and did something with a family's heirloom cake knife that ended the celebration for everyone. Because, hello to everyone listening, thank you for dropping by my channel. I would be so grateful if you would subscribe and give this video a like. Please write in the comments what country you're from. I'm always so interested to read where you're listening from. Now enjoy the story. You know, there's a kind of silence that only exists in the very early morning at a lake house, before the first birds, before the sun touches the tops of the old apple trees. The air in the house is cool, smelling of wood, of the dried herbs I hang from the rafters, and a little of last night's rain. At 78, I no longer need a long sleep. My body wakes with nature, a habit developed over decades. On that Thanksgiving morning, I got up when it was still completely dark outside, a deep blue canvas with a scattering of fading stars. I put on my old robe, the one my late husband, Richard, had given me, and tiptoed to the kitchen. Not making a floorboard creak is an art in our old house. Every board has its own voice, its own memory. This one by the stove always grumbles, and the one by the threshold sighs. I know them all. On this day, a special task awaited me in the kitchen. Thanksgiving. For me, it's not just a holiday, but a whole ritual, a sacrament. The most important part of this sacrament is the pie. I had made the dough the night before, wrapping the large bowl in my mother's downy shawl. It had to breathe, to live its own life, to gather strength. I lifted the lid, and a warm, sweet, yeasty smell hit my nose. It was alive. It had risen perfectly. I turned the airy, porous mass onto a floured table. The house immediately felt warmer. I don't like fuss, especially in such matters. Every movement has been perfected over the years. Add the apples, soaked in brandy, the candied peel, a pinch of cinnamon. The aroma. This aroma is a time machine. It takes me back 50 years, when Richard, still young and strong, would come into the kitchen, hug me from behind, and bury his nose in the top of my head. "Eleanor," he would say, "you don't have hands, you have treasures." The whole house smells of happiness. Where is that happiness now? Only the smell remains. While the pies were rising in their pans, I started on the honey-glazed ham, basting it as my mother had taught me, adding cloves, brown sugar, a touch of pineapple juice. This too is a memory. A memory of my mother's hands, of her quiet voice humming something old. I always follow her recipe exactly, without deviating a single step. It seems to me that if I change something, I will betray her, betray all the love she put into every holiday table. By 9 in the morning, the house was filled with the anticipation of the holiday. A turkey, stuffed with garlic, and the rosemary I grow in the garden under the window, was browning in the oven. On the table, tall, proud pies with snow-white meringue caps were cooling. Everything was ready for the arrival of my son Paul's family, his wife Amelia, and my granddaughter Annie. I love this lake house. Every corner of it is a part of me. Richard and I planted these apple trees when we first got the plot. He dug the holes, and I, young and laughing, held the thin saplings. "Our children and grandchildren will eat these apples and remember you," he would say. And there's the stream where I took little Paul to learn to fish. His delight when he pulled out his first tiny minnow. He had hugged my neck with his thin little arms and shouted, "Mommy, you're the best in the world." My God, how long ago that was. It seems like another life. I stepped out onto the porch. The morning sun had already warmed the old wooden steps. Everything in the garden was in bloom. The air was thick, intoxicating. I took a deep breath. In moments like these, it seemed I could forgive everything in the world, forget all the small grievances, all the barbs, all the inattention that had become the norm in recent years. After all, family is the most important thing. The main thing is that they will come, that the house will once again be filled with voices. That's what I told myself. I heard the sound of a car from afar. It tore through the morning silence like an inappropriate loud note. A slight anxiety stirred in my soul. I straightened my apron and went to meet them. The first to flit out of the car was Amelia, my daughter-in-law. All city chic in fashionable jeans and a bright jacket that didn't fit with the quiet green of my garden. She glanced at the house, at me, and something like condescending pity flashed across her face. "Hello, Eleanor," she said on the go, already heading for the house. No hug, no warm word. Next came Paul, overweight, with a tired face. He awkwardly hugged my shoulders. "Hi, Mom. Not too tired out here alone?" "Hello, son. How can one be tired in joy?" The last to get out was Annie, my sunshine. She ran to me, hugged me tightly, and pressed her cheek against mine. "Grandma, what smells so good? The pies? Only for these hugs, it seemed to me, was it all worth it?" We entered the house. I had already set the large table in the living room. Taken out my best tablecloth, the one with the cutwork embroidery that my mother had stitched during long winter evenings, snow white, starched. It seemed to me a real symbol of the holiday, of the connection between generations. Amelia stopped in the middle of the room, her arms crossed. "Oh, Mom," she never called me Mom, only this cloying Mom from which everything inside me clenched. "What is this old thing? It's like a museum. Let's put something more cheerful on." With these words, she pulled a colorful plastic tablecloth from her bag, a cheap thing with some garish, screaming flowers. "Here, I bought this specially. It's festive, isn't it?" I looked at my tablecloth, at every stitch in which there was love and patience, and then at this plastic sheet, cold, soulless. I wanted to say something, to object that this wasn't just a tablecloth, but a memory, but I looked up at Paul. He was standing by the window, pretending to be intensely interested in a bud on a lilac branch. He saw everything, heard everything, and said nothing, as always. "All right, Amelia," I said quietly, "as you wish." I carefully removed my tablecloth, folded it, and put it away in the old chest, and on the table lay this plastic sheet. It immediately made the whole room look cheap and alien. At the table, everything went according to the usual scenario. Amelia was the center of attention. She loudly talked about their plans for a summer vacation in Europe, complained about her boss, boasted about a new handbag. The other guests, her sister and her husband, whom they had brought with them, listened attentively and nodded. Paul ate in silence, occasionally inserting some meaningless phrase. I was invisible. I would get up to bring more bread, pour juice into glasses, clear dirty plates. I was a function. The service staff at a holiday in my own home. No one asked how I felt. No one said, "Eleanor, this turkey is delicious." They ate my food, sat in my house, enjoyed the fruits of my labor, but for them, I myself might as well not have existed. I sat at the head of the table and felt infinitely lonely. Annie sat next to me and sometimes squeezed my hand reassuringly under the table. She was the only one who saw, but what could she do, a 16-year-old girl against her parents? And then the moment came. I had been so busy with the hustle and bustle that I had eaten almost nothing. Finally, everyone was a little full, and I decided to put some turkey on my plate. I was tired, and I just wanted to eat a piece of the hot meat that I had prepared with such love. I reached for the large platter that stood in the center of the table, but Amelia's hand was quicker. She intercepted the platter with a light, almost condescending smile. "Here. Let me get everyone some more." She put a good piece on her husband's plate, then on Paul's, then on her sister's, and then she took a spoon and began to scrape what was left at the bottom of the platter onto my plate. Scraps of fat, small bones, already gnawed on by someone, a few burnt pieces from the edge. It wasn't even food, it was leftovers. She placed the plate in front of me. Her smile became even wider, cloyingly sweet, and she said the words that pierced me like icy needles. "Here, Mom, you're not very hungry, are you? This should be enough for you." A silence fell at the table, a deathly silence. Even Amelia's ever-chattering sister fell silent, staring at her plate. I looked up at Paul. My son, my only son. He wasn't looking at me. He was examining the pattern on his fork with incredible attention, as if he were seeing it for the first time. He had made himself blind and deaf. He had allowed this to happen. In that instant, something happened. Something inside me that for years had trembled, ached, clenched with resentment, suddenly froze, became absolutely still, stopped feeling. As if an old, worn-out mechanism that had creaked and groaned but continued to work had suddenly made its last turn and stopped forever. My chest became cold and empty. All the noise at the table, the awkward whispers that had begun, the clatter of cutlery, receded, turned into a dull, monotonous hum, as if I had sunk under water. And in my head, there was only one thought, crystal clear, merciless in its simplicity: enough. I looked at the plate of scraps, not with disgust, not with resentment, but with a kind of cold, detached curiosity, as if it were some artifact, exhibited in a museum called my life. Here they are, the leftovers from someone else's feast: bones, gristle, a potato stuck to the plate. A very accurate and honest symbol. The buzzing in my ears stopped, and absolute silence fell, as ringing as the frosty air. And in that silence, I felt my spine become straight and hard. I was no longer bent under the weight of unspoken words. and swallowed humiliations. I straightened up. Slowly, without a single sharp movement, I took a linen napkin, dabbed my lips, which had not touched the food, and carefully placed it next to my plate. It was my final gesture of politeness. "Where are you going?" Amelia's voice was sharp as a shard of glass. It held the irritation of a hostess whose servant had decided to go on an unauthorized break-in. The middle of a reception. I didn't answer. I didn't even look in her direction. Why? Her question was addressed to the former Eleanor, who would have been frightened, would have started to apologize, to mumble something about blood pressure or fatigue. But that woman was no longer there. She remained sitting there at the table, invisible and silent, in front of her plate of bones, and I stood up and walked. I walked across the room, past the frozen faces of the guests, past Paul's bewildered gaze, who had finally torn himself away from his fork. I walked to the sideboard made of dark oak, which I had inherited from my parents, and on it, on a napkin I had embroidered myself, stood it, my apple pie. I had baked it all day yesterday. Not just mixed ingredients, no, I had rolled out 8 paper-thin layers of dough. I had cooked the custard, making sure it didn't burn, that it became the perfect silky consistency. I had soaked each layer, spread it with cream, sprinkled it with crushed walnuts. It was tall, perfectly even, with golden brown sides. I had decorated the top with a lattice of liquid honey and almond petals. It wasn't just a pie. Was my labor, my patience, my love for detail, my small work of art, created to please them. The family stared at me. They were expecting a scene. They were expecting me to grab this pie and throw it on the floor, or to burst into tears, run into the garden, and suffer demonstratively. Their faces were a mixture of curiosity and slight contempt. Well, here we go. The old woman has finally lost her mind. I took a clean knife with a thin blade from the sideboard. I took 2 porcelain saucers from the old service that Richard and I had bought for our silver wedding anniversary. And in the ensuing silence, broken only by the awkward cough of Amelia's sister's husband, I made the first cut. The knife went into the pie softly, like into butter. I cut one piece. Not a small one, out of politeness, but a generous, substantial, perfect triangle, in which all 8 layers of my patience were visible. I carefully lifted it with a spatula and transferred it to a saucer. Then I cut a second, exactly the same, perfect piece. With 2 saucers in my hands, I turned to the table. But I didn't go to my place. I went to Annie. She was looking at me with wide-open eyes, and in them, there was no pity or curiosity. There was understanding. "This is for you, my sunshine," I said quietly. Placing the plate in front of her, she nodded, and a barely perceptible, but so warm smile touched her lips. I took my own plate in my hand and, without turning back, walked out of the room. I walked to my small bedroom at the end of the hall. Behind me, I heard someone start to whisper hastily, but the words no longer mattered. They were just background noise. I entered my room and closed the door behind me. I turned the latch. This quiet click sounded louder to me than any scream. It separated my world from their world, forever. The room was small, almost entirely taken up by a bed and an old bookcase. I sat on the edge of the bed, on the patchwork quilt I had made myself from scraps of old dresses and Richard's shirts. I placed the saucer on my lap, brought a fork with a piece of pie to my mouth. The sweetness of the honey, the tenderness of the cream, the softness of the layers. My God, how delicious it was. I wasn't just eating. I was savoring every bite. Savoring my freedom. It was the first time in many years that I had eaten something I had prepared not on the run, not after everyone else, but for myself, and enjoyed it. It was at that moment, with the taste of honey on my tongue, that a memory came to me, so vivid, as if it were yesterday. I am 42 years old. I work in the city archives. Not just work, I live for it. I adore the smell of old paper, the dust of ages. I can spend hours deciphering faded ink, restoring history from semi-decayed documents. I am valued, respected, and then, the chance of a lifetime comes my way. I am invited to a major project in Washington, D.C., at the Library of Congress, to lead a group for the systematization of a rare fund. It's not just a business trip, it's a springboard, it's recognition. It's what I've been dreaming of since my student years. Richard is happy for me. He knows how important it is to me. Go, Eleanor. He says, "You've earned it. I'll manage with Paul." I'm already packing, mentally already there, among the shelves of folios. And then Paul gets sick, not just a cold, but pneumonia, very severe, with complications. The hospital, sleepless nights at his bedside, and then a long recovery period. The doctors are blunt. He needs to be at home, rest, constant care, no. Daycare for at least a year. He needs his mother 24 hours a day, and I am faced with a choice. Washington or my son, a dream or a duty. The choice is obvious, isn't it? For a mother, it is always obvious. I remember sitting at the table and writing my resignation. I am resigning for personal reasons. The pen scratched the paper. Every letter seemed to be carved on my heart. I was putting an end to my career, to my dream, to the part of myself that was not only a mother and a wife, but also just Eleanor, a specialist, a person. I did it without tears. Without complaints, because it had to be done. For him, for my boy, who now, 36 years later, is sitting in the next room and can't look me in the eye while his wife feeds me scraps. I finished the last piece of pie, licked the fork, and placed the empty saucer on the nightstand. There was not a drop of bitterness in me, only a cold, ringing clarity. The debt was paid, in full. I took my old flip phone from the nightstand. My fingers didn't tremble. I opened the contact list. Found the right number, Zoe Realta. Zoe. A sweet woman. I had once looked after her twin children when she was just starting her business and couldn't afford a nanny. She always said, "Eleanor, I'm indebted to you for life." I pressed the call button. The rings began. 1, 2. Hello, a cheerful female voice came on the line. I took a calm breath. Zoe, hello. It's Eleanor Vance. Eleanor, my God, how many years? I'm so glad to hear from you. How are you, How's? Your health, thank you, Zoe. Everything is fine. I'm calling on business. I paused, listening to the dull noise behind the door. It seemed so distant, so unimportant. I'm ready to sell the lake house. Zoe was silent for a moment on the line. APPRENTLY processing the news. Then her voice became businesslike but still warm. I understand, Eleanor. Of course, when would it be convenient for me to come by, look at everything, and take pictures? We agreed on Saturday. After hanging up, I felt not relief, but rather a sense of rightness, as if I had finally set a dislocated joint back in place. The pain was still there, but everything was in its place. I didn't go out to see them off. I heard them hastily gathering, heard Amelia hissing something angrily at Paul, heard the car door slam. And then, a few minutes later, there was a soft knock on my door. "Grandma, it was Annie. Are you okay? Open it." She was standing in the hallway, worried, and looked at me with such unchildlike anxiety. "We're leaving. Mom said you have a headache." "Everything is fine, my sunshine." I stroked her cheek. "I'm just a little tired. Go on, call me tomorrow." She nodded, quickly hugged me, and slipped out the door. This brief moment was like a breath of fresh air. I was not alone. When the sound of their car faded in the distance, I came out of my room. The living room was in disarray, dirty plates, half-empty glasses, crumpled napkins, and in the middle of it all, a bright, ugly spot of the colorful plastic tablecloth. I went to the table, took it by the corner, crumpled it into a tight ball, and, without regret, threw it in the trash. Then I took my embroidered tablecloth from the chest, spread it on the table, and the room became mine again. The silence that filled the house was not empty, but peaceful. It was the silence of freedom. The next few days I lived in this blissful peace. I sorted through old books, went through photographs, walked in the garden. I didn't think about the upcoming conversation. I knew it was inevitable, but I wasn't afraid of it. The fear had died in that very moment when they placed the plate of scraps in front of me. On Wednesday evening, I called Paul. I didn't beat around the bush. "Paul, hello. I'm calling to warn you. This Saturday at noon, a realtor is coming to appraise the lake house for sale." There was a silence on the line for a few seconds, then a disbelieving laugh. "Mom, are you still offended?" Amelia got a little carried away. "It happens to everyone. You know her. Why these jokes about selling?" "I'm not joking, Paul." My voice was absolutely even. "Saturday at noon. Please ensure access if you decide to come." In the background, I heard Amelia's agitated voice. "What is it? What did she say?" "Mom, wait." Panic was already in Paul's voice. "What sale? Are you serious?" "Absolutely. Goodbye, son." I ended the call. I didn't want to get into an argument over the phone. For that, there is a personal meeting. I knew it wouldn't be long in coming, and so it happened. They didn't come. On Saturday, they rushed over the very next day. I heard their car screech to a halt at the gate, heard the gravel crunch furiously under the wheels. The doors slammed as if they had been kicked open. I was waiting for them in the living room. I was sitting in the old wingback chair, the one Richard loved to sit in while reading the newspaper. It was both a throne and a fortress for me. On the small table next to me was a cup of linden tea from which a thin, fragrant steam was rising. I was completely calmed. The door flew open without a knock. On the threshold stood Amelia. Her face was red and blotchy. Behind her, like a shadow, loomed Paul. "Mom, have you lost your mind?" Amelia screamed from the threshold. Her voice, usually so honeyed, was now sharp and unpleasant. She didn't even say hello. "Selling our house. Do you even understand what you're doing?" She flew up to me, waving her arms. "Have you thought about the family? Where will we gather for the holidays? Where will Annie spend the summer, breathing the asphalt in the city? Do you want to deprive your own granddaughter of fresh air?" I silently took a small sip of tea. Hot, sweet, it was calming. I let her talk, let her vent. When Amelia fell silent for a second to catch her breath, Paul joined the conversation. He chose a different tactic, the tactic of guilt. He came and stood next to my chair, looking down at me with an expression of universal sorrow on his face. "Mom, how could you? This is Father's house, a memory. He hammered every board here with his own hands. Do you want to sell all this, betray his memory? We planted every tree here. You yourself remember how we planted this apple tree." He vaguely waved his hand towards the window. I listened to them, listened, and was amazed at how transparent and primitive their motives were. Fear. Not fear for me or for memory. Fear of losing a free vacation spot, a free servant, convenience. They talked about the house, about memory, about the sauna. But I heard only one thing. "How dare you take our property away from us?" They talked for a long time. Amelia screamed about the money invested, meaning the lawnmower they had once bought in the cheap plastic chairs. Paul mumbled about spiritual bonds and family traditions. I was silent. I just sat in my father's chair, drank my tea, and looked at them. And I saw not formidable accusers, but two frightened, selfish people whose ground was slipping from under their feet. Finally, they ran out of steam. A heavy, tense silence hung in the room. They were waiting for my reaction, waiting for tears, excuses, pleas for forgiveness. I slowly, with dignity, placed the cup on the saucer. The light porcelain clinked in the silence like the strike of a gong, and I began to speak quietly, without the slightest hint of anger or resentment. First, I looked at my son. "This is not our house, Paul." My words fell into the silence like stones into water. "This is my house. Your father and I built it, yes, but after his death. By law and by his will, I remain the sole owner, and all the documents, if you're interested, are in my name only." I paused, letting him process what he had heard. "And as for memory," I sighed, not from sadness, but from a slight weariness. "It seems you and Amelia only remember it when it's convenient for you, when you need to shame me or get something from me. On Easter, for some reason. You didn't remember your father's memory when you allowed his widow to be humiliated at his own table." Paul's face turned gray. He looked away. He was disarmed. Then I slowly turned my head and looked directly into Amelia's eyes. She was still breathing heavily, like a cornered horse. "You were right, Amelia," I said just as quietly. She started in surprise. "You said that a little would be enough for me. And you know, I thought about it and realized you are absolutely right. A little is indeed enough for me. So I will take what is rightfully mine, this house and this land. And that will be more than enough for me." I surveyed the room, my home, where every object was a part of my soul. "And you can create your new memories somewhere else. I'm sure you'll find a place to gather." My voice didn't tremble. There was no vindictiveness or gloating in it. There was only a statement of fact, as indisputable as the changing of the seasons. It was not a declaration of war. It was a peace treaty, but signed exclusively on my terms. They were silent, just stood in the middle of the room and looked at me as if they were seeing me for the first time. Perhaps they were looking at the woman who was sitting in her husband's chair, at the mistress of her house and her life. They had no more arguments. They left quietly, without shouting, without slamming the door. They just turned and walked out, leaving behind a ringing emptiness. I knew this wasn't the end of their attempts, but the main battle was won. I remained sitting in the chair, listening to the silence. The house was breathing calmly, as if it too had been relieved of a burden. Zoe arrived on Saturday, as agreed. Energetic, businesslike, she walked around the whole house, every corner of the garden, clicking her tongue. "Eleanor, this isn't a summer house, it's a treasure," she said, taking pictures of the blooming peonies. "What a location, what land. So well kept, it will fly off the market in an instant, you'll see." I looked at it all through her eyes, the eyes of a stranger, and for the first time in many years, I saw not only the invested labor and memories, but also the real value, an asset. Something that could be turned from a symbol of service into an instrument for life. But the real twist, the one that changed everything, came not from a realtor, but from the past. A week after my decision, a certified letter arrived. It was from a law firm I'd never heard of. Inside was a copy of a single, yellowed page from a local newspaper, dated 1955. It was a public notice. My late husband's grandfather, a man I'd only known through stories, had purchased this entire tract of land. The notice contained a peculiar clause, a legacy covenant, stating that the land could only be passed down or sold as a single, undivided parcel. It could never be subdivided for development. He had put the clause in place to preserve the natural beauty of the area, to prevent it from being turned into a row of identical suburban houses. And then I understood. My son Paul, a real estate developer, hadn't just wanted the lake house for summer vacations. His plans were much bigger. He had been working for years to get his hands on the property, not to live in, but to tear down, to subdivide the land and build a lucrative housing development. My refusal to sell wasn't just an inconvenience, it had destroyed his multi-million-dollar dream. The reason he and Amelia had been so desperate, the reason for their cruelty, wasn't just about losing a free vacation spot, it was about losing a jackpot they had been counting on for years. My late husband, Richard, must have known. He never spoke of the covenant, but he knew his son. He knew his son's ambition. By leaving the house solely to me, he wasn't just giving me a home. He was giving me a shield. He had protected his family's land from his own son's greed. The consequences for Paul and Amelia were not immediate. There was another phone call. It was Paul. His voice was tired and alien. He didn't ask, didn't threaten. He complained. "Mom, I was looking at brochures. Do you have any idea how much 2 weeks in the simplest Turkish 3-star hotel costs now? It's a fortune. At least we used to have the lake house. Annie could spend the whole summer in the fresh air, and now, what?" I listened to him and felt no gloating, no pity. I only felt a detachment. He wasn't talking to me, not to his mother. He was talking to his lost comfort. He was mourning not a family nest, but a free resort. Prices are high for everything now. "Son," I answered calmly, "one has to choose." He said something else about inflation, about the injustice of life, but I was hardly listening anymore. This conversation was the final nail in the coffin of my illusions. He hadn't understood anything, and probably never would. The lake house did sell very quickly. A young family with 2 children was found, who looked with delight at the apple trees and imagined hanging a swing on them. They spoke with such respect about how well kept everything was, how everything was done with love. I was giving my home into good hands. When we signed the documents, I didn't feel the bitterness of loss. I felt that I was passing the torch. My mission here was complete. I immediately put part of the money into an account for Annie, for her education, for her future. The rest was mine. For the first time in my life, I had my own large sum of money. Not a pension that lasted from one apartment payment to the next, but capital. Freedom. Annie and I were sitting in a small coffee shop in the city center. On the table between us were bright, glossy brochures. St. Petersburg, the White Knights, the Hermitage, the Russian Museum. I hadn't been there since my youth, when Richard and I went there for our honeymoon. "Grandma, look." Annie pointed to a photograph of St. Isaac's Cathedral. "Can you imagine? We'll climb to the colonnade, and the whole city will be in the palm of our hand." Her eyes were shining, and mine probably were too. "And I want to go to the Hermitage," I said, and my voice sounded unusually young and cheerful. "I want to see Rembrandt's Return of the Prodigal Son. I've looked at reproductions and albums my whole life, Annie, and now I'll see the real brushstrokes. Can you imagine that light, that golden, warm light that falls on the sun's figure?" I talked about paintings, about architecture, about canals, and I felt that same Eleanor, the young archivist, waking up inside me. The one who knew the history of every building, every painting. The one I had buried under a pile of domestic chores, under layers of resentment, under the weight of duty. She was alive. She had just been sleeping very deeply. Annie listened to me with her mouth open, and I saw in her gaze not only love, but also admiration. She saw not just a grandmother who bakes pies. She saw an interesting person, a personality. My city apartment was transformed. It had never been so cozy. I brought a few of the most precious things from the lake house. My father's armchair, old photographs in frames, Richard's books, my embroidered tablecloth. I got rid of all the unnecessary old things that cluttered the space, and it became easy to breathe in the apartment. just as easy as it had become for me to breathe. And so tonight, I am sitting on my small but cozy balcony. Around me are pots of flowers that I planted myself, geraniums, petunias. They smell of summer and a new life. The city below is noisy, sparkling with lights, living its turbulent life. And this noise no longer irritates me, it seems like music. To me, I am holding my new phone in my hand. Annie taught me how to use a smartphone. On the screen is a confirmation. 2 tickets on the high-speed train to St. Petersburg and a reservation at a small hotel with windows overlooking a quiet street. I lean back in the wicker chair and look at the night sky. I don't think about Paul, I don't think about Amelia. I don't think about what they lost. I think about myself, about what I have gained. A new, unfamiliar but so pleasant feeling spreads in my chest. It's not joy, not delight. It's something deeper. It's peace. A quiet, clear, all-encompassing silence within, and I understand that this is the feeling of a debt paid. But not the debt that someone owed me, but the one that I owed myself. To the young girl who dreamed of Leningrad, to the woman who sacrificed her career for her son, to the old woman who for years endured humiliation in the name of a ghostly family peace. I have finally paid them all. I have reclaimed myself, and this quiet joy, this calm breathing with a full chest on my own balcony, became possible only because one day I found the strength not to remain silent, not to swallow another insult, but to stand up and cut myself a piece of pie, my own well-deserved piece. It turned out that to get your whole life back, sometimes you just have to start with a single piece of pie. Thank you for being with me until the very end. If this story touched you, please give it a like and write in the comments if you have had to deal with similar disrespect and how you found the strength to change it. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories. Be healthy, value yourself, and live truly.